Right, I've been working on a presentation. I'm going to try and go through it. Not sure how well this will go. Okay, I'm beginning this presentation with a moment of vulnerability and perhaps something I regret, a kind of an honest and open sort of start. This is a grumpy tweet that I posted in November, sorry. And it says, lack of serious art teachers on edgy Twitter because dearth of arrogant SLTs who think approach to their subject should be template for everyone else. No one is questioning, deconstructing, reframing, thinking, presenting arguments, then fighting to win. Not how artists think. So what was I getting at with this tweet? Because although it was a silly thing to have done and I kind of regret it, at the same time, you know, I feel like it's my responsibility now to try and articulate what on earth I was grumbling about. And I decided really that it was about two things. Firstly, that there's something different about teaching and learning in art, how art teachers approach their subject, how art teachers and artists think. And not only are those differences not acknowledged by the wider educational discourse that happens constantly on Twitter, but it could actually be beneficial, or it could lend something, or it could take the conversation to a more productive place. So that's really what I was getting at. And these are the two big questions that informed basically this whole presentation. But I've kind of had, obviously because of time, I've had to sort of focus in on a couple of things to make it shorter. The other thing that's worth saying is that I realized looking back that I was making a couple of assumptions about non-art teachers. I was making the assumption that a lot of non-art teachers don't really understand what is happening or what happens, sorry, in art lessons. Like they don't really know what goes on in general. And they have a vague idea, but they don't really understand it. And I thought, you know, maybe they'd be interested to know, or that it could inform their own practice in some way. And the other thing that I made an assumption about was that I feel, and I don't know whether this is me just inventing stuff, but I feel that you know, amongst non-art, knowledge-rich teachers, there is kind of a question mark hanging over art. And they're not really sure if and how it fits in to the idea of knowledge-rich teaching, and things like cultural literacy and stuff. My cat needs to be let out, so if you will excuse me for a moment, I will do that. Okay, little madam. But anyway, yeah, so if those assumptions don't really apply to you, then, you know, I'm sorry, but hopefully still get something out of this. And, you know, but if you are, you know, a little bit blurry about what we really do in art, and if you've always kind of thought, how does art really work when it comes to knowledge-rich teaching? This is basically aimed at you, mainly. Because of these broad questions, and the kind of way that I think, I started off in thinking like really broadly about this, and then later on I had to sort of like zone in or narrow down what I was saying. So, you know, a lot of this is still very much in flux. I've referred to it here as a deconstruction site, and I've used a couple of images to kind of reinforce what I'm saying. But my main aims in this presentation will be to raise questions for you, provoke a little bit of reflection upon your own practice, and also just share a different perspective and a different set of experiences on teaching. I've chosen images throughout this presentation that I'm hoping will add a little bit of depth, add a little bit of just something to look at and to think about while I'm talking, and kind of support my ideas. But I'm not going to have a lot of time to explain why I chose them, unfortunately. So if you want to talk to me about them afterwards, I'd love to talk to you about them, but we haven't got time during the actual presentation, sorry. So if that all sounds very open and sort of like what's the opposite of concrete? Kind of like fluid and in flux. Then I just wanted to reassure you, I am going to try and land on some sort of specific points. And that's really in response to this quote from Hirsch: those who defend art as being on a different level, a higher plane, and therefore different in kind from other domains of experience and education, are perhaps as culpable as the Philistines for creating this sense of marginality in the public conception of art and art education. I am really keen to see art considered as part of the curriculum, and I want art to come closer and for our other teachers to understand it more. And I want us to be taken, as seriously as all the other subjects, and not the other way around. So I am fighting against this. However, I'm sorry, but there is something different about what we do in art. I'm pretty certain of it. It's not that it's on a higher plane or a different level, which makes us kind of somehow superior. I just think we approach things from a different angle and we have different priorities. So I can't necessarily be more specific as Hirsch suggests here. That's perhaps his priority and not mine as an art teacher, but I'll try and be specific about why I can't be specific, if that makes any sense. So again, E.D. Hirsch, and I'll refer back to him later because I know that he's kind of important for knowledge-rich advocates. So how will I approach these questions? Firstly, I'll respond to the idea of a knowledge-rich education and how I kind of like embody that or kind of align with that in my lessons. Then I'll talk a little bit about what defines me as an art teacher within that setting and kind of the areas which within which I kind of break the rules, bend the rules a little bit, or kind of have to do my own thing because I'm an art teacher and those are my art teaching priorities. I'll talk about how these dual priorities exist and sometimes how they are in tension or clashing or in contrast with each other, and whether or not this tension should be resolved or in some way embraced and harnessed. I want to say about this idea of dual identities or dual priorities that for me personally, my identity as an art teacher and as a knowledge-rich teacher or teacher in a knowledge-rich school, probably a bit more accurate, that is not the only sort of set of kind of ideals that kind of contrast with each other. For example, I am an artist and I'm also an art teacher or an artist teacher, and those two things also sometimes kind of exist in tension with each other or pull me in different directions or inform each other. And I'm sure for many people in the room here who might be, for example, parents, their teacher head and their parent head are often telling them different things. And the same thing for SLT members. Their line manager head and their teacher head, or their line manager head and the historian head, or whatever, might be telling them different things. So it's common. I think it can be productive, or I'd like to try and suggest that. So let's get on with it. So how do I respond to knowledge rich? Well, firstly, I focus a lot on technique. I do a lot of demonstration in my lessons. Not too much, obviously. I have to be very careful about creating a balance. But also when I'm talking to students, giving their feedback, especially when they are in process or making something, I tend to keep my feedback technical, or I'm trying to. It's really difficult as an artist not to look at work as a finished piece and make aesthetic judgments and sort of like feed those back to students. But I'm trying more and more to focus on technique, especially when work is in progress. And then afterwards, we'll have those aesthetic discussions or the evaluation or the sort of value judgment. But yeah, a lot of what I talk about and what I teach is technique. Because it's concrete, it's malleable, you can actually do something about it in the present. You can act on it and you can change it. So for those people that aren't sort of, don't have necessarily, aren't that geared towards having ideas to start off with, technique is something that they can get on with, and that, all that stuff will come later. Logical schemes. Just before I move on, I am actually going to undermine a little bit of what I've said there later, just in case you just just in case you're worried. Right, so all the schemes are laid out quite logically. This is not necessarily just due to me. I've got very organized colleagues, and the way we set things out is, that we cover a lot of the most simple, fundamental, basic skills earlier on, and then later on we use that foundation of basic skills to attempt more ambitious stuff and more complicated stuff, and also to kind of take the skills and sort of mix them together, or like combine them in weird ways. And I think that's pretty universal across all teaching everywhere, but it's something that kind of aligns me with knowledge rich. Also, not only are these tasks kind of supported by other skills, but they're supported by contextual knowledge, by research. I could talk to you for ages about how I approach analysis in my lessons, but we spend a lot of time making sure that students know the terminology that surrounds what they're doing, and also just kind of like key works, key artists, that sort of thing, and some of the themes or concepts that surround them. So that's pretty knowledge rich, right? Practice and rigor. I am absolutely adamant that my subject requires hard work. It's not a DOS, it's not a soft option, it's not a laugh or a breeze, although it can be extremely fun, rewarding, and all those other things. You have to give a lot of yourself. It's what I always say to students, that you can't just do what you're told, that you have to work really hard on your own steam. And sometimes that means doing something again and again, milking every last drop of value out of it, and approaching it from every angle, every conceivable position. And that's what it's all about, I think. Rigor, I love this word. Seriousness, again, like I ask my students to take my subject seriously, because I take it absolutely seriously, just like they take all of their other subjects seriously. So what do I value as an artist or an art teacher that kind of clashes with my knowledge rich status or like environment? Well, independence is a quick way of saying this. In art, we're basically, it's gone back. In art, we're basically concerned with ideas. If you look on the AQA assessment criteria, you won't find any mention, I don't think, of words like beauty or even detail. We are assessing students' ability to develop, to refine, and then to realize and to resolve ideas. We telegraph that process for assessment through rigorous experimentation with different materials, techniques, processes, and also through research, into other artists, and also into just other issues, other problems. But I can support students a lot through that, and I can guide them, and I can push them sometimes. I can really twist their arm and send them in this direction or that direction. But really, I can't obviously have ideas for them. That's not something that I can physically do, try as I might. There has to be a tiny seed of independent engagement at very, 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 very least. If we get a student to halfway through their GCSE or halfway through an A-level, and they're turning to me every single lesson and say, what do I do now? I have to sit them down and say, listen, this isn't sustainable. You're an artist now, or you're an art student. Some of this needs to come from you. We've looked at all these materials, we've looked at all these artists, I've given you problems. You need to come to me with suggestions. I can tell you my opinion, but it has to come, the kernel, like the thrust behind the project has to come from the students. That's that. So in order to avoid the situation when we get a student who's over reliant on my or our input, we have to start in year 7, 8, 9, providing them with these controlled opportunities to challenge assumptions, zoom out, look at the parameters of a task and step outside of them, think laterally, as that's often described, be creative. And that has to start from the very beginning. But again, it's not like we get into the first year 7 lesson and I just say to them, what do you want to do? As exciting as that sounds to me on a kind of radical level, it just wouldn't work for me. I've not got the skills to pull that off yet. But I'd love to try it one day. But to be honest with you, the way that we do it now, the way that I do it now, I kind of it works. I think it's the right way of doing it. We're teaching students to have ideas. We're not just expecting them to do it. So yeah, as the projects go on, they take more and more ownership. The work becomes more and more theirs, and they have to really believe that it's A, theirs, and B, that it's worth doing. And kind of tied up in this idea of it being worth doing is that the idea that it's either unique to them, autobiographical, or that it's new. But again, I try my best to sort of de-emphasize or sidestep the idea of originality. But it has to feel like at least no one else in the class is doing that, I think, for some of them. Anyway, what I want to avoid here is this kind of really black and white, binary, dichotomous sort of approach where, freedom and independence is bad or all good, and control and rigor, control and sort of discipline is good or bad. I don't set these things up in opposition with each other, because for me, I need both of them, and it's my job to provide a little bit of this and a little bit of that, to blend or to like decide when one or the other is appropriate. And I have to be able to do both, which is a delicate balancing act, and it's what I think art teaching is really all about. To support this idea of like a practical middle ground, I've included two quotes here taken from articles for and by progressive ideologues. This is Joseph Beuys on the left. He taught at the Dusseldorf Academy of Art in the 60s. Massively radical, rebellious. Like in the end, he got fired for sort of refusing to ask his students to pay for the education, which they had to do. But he was extremely progressive and sort of all about students finding their own way. But in another sense, he was very authoritative and very confrontational and very didactic. In some of his tutorials, he would like chop up student sculptures with an axe in order to make a point about their practice or the work they were doing. So it was brutal and very sort of like he was tackling or dealing with that problem that all teachers, art teachers, maybe all teachers, have to still deal with, and that is that he had to command respect and trust, but at the same time his students had to be able to get up afterwards and carry on and sort of still feel like they had some agency. Anyway, that's Beuys. And then on the right is Albers. Again, like his work at Yale, at Bauhaus, at Black Mountain College is kind of often held up as this mythical beacon of progressive idealism or something. But his courses, although they were all about students independently encountering materials and making their own discoveries about what did and didn't work, if you look at them, they're extremely limited, structured, kind of teacher-led. I mean, everything that the students did, he provided them with very precise access to. He would, for example, he would only allow students up to a point to work on paper that was hanging freely in the middle of a space and not lying flat on a desk. So he would only allow very limited access to tools. So yeah, like two people who, like I'm telling you, in reality, like it wasn't black and white. And even Hirsch here acknowledges between cultural literacy and the prophets of change, there will always be some tension, but in the larger view, tradition and innovation in art education could be seen as two permanent necessities and two equally desirable aims, neither of which should be permitted total domination. He then goes on to make another point about curriculum design, which I don't agree with, but you know, in many ways, Hirsch has the insight and the sort of like the wisdom there to acknowledge that something different has to happen in art education. Here's a really positive example, I think, of how art teachers think and teach differently. Hopefully this will encourage us to reflect on our own practice. On the left here, he makes a list of all of the things that teacher demonstrations are good at doing. They show all the specific techniques, they establish teacher as expert, they provide an example of what to do, and they help establish order. However, as you'll see cheekily in the right-hand side column, he has listed the exact same things in the bad column. And his little bit of text here reads, tricky business, demonstrating skills and techniques. Quickly, to not waste lesson time. Slowly, to show the time required. Demonstrating no fear of failure, yet fearing failure because you're the teacher. Wanting to show specific techniques, but not wanting to limit alternative or unexpected approaches. Promoting the craft and concentrated effort required, but celebrating the wonky, accidental, and unexpected. So, you know, this is the perfect kind of example of the sort of line that art teachers need to walk, in order to teach, but also remain true to the spirit of their subject. And you know, I'm thinking now of just this popped into my head, like many artists I've heard talking about art education, explaining how terrible their art education was and how they believe that art can't actually be taught. Well, you know, I'm sure there's not much I could do to persuade those people that they are wrong. But, you know, for me, I believe art can be taught, but in order to do it, you have to approach it in a certain way with a degree of balance. You have to respect the subject, but also you have to teach it. So this guy's called Chris Francis, in case you're unaware of him. He's an art teacher. I think he's like head of art and photography or something. And his Instagram account is huge, so popular. I highly recommend it. It really makes me think all the time. I think not only is this good art teaching, it's just good thinking. It's just reflective. It's full of candor and honesty. And it's... This is my Italian neighbour leaving the house. Let me just pause for a moment. Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so as I was saying, this guy's brilliant, and I'm just really curious to ask or to find out if anybody watching this presentation finds any truth in this silly little diagram and this little bit of text that this guy posted, because to me it's full of truth and sort of like it really applies to my, you know, daily experience as an art teacher. But I'm wondering, you know, is establishing the teacher as an expert ever a bad idea for anyone but an art teacher? I'd like to think that there is, that, you know, that's like I said, that all of us, you know, if we really thought about it, like these ideas could help us and could inform our practice and could help us to reflect and to just make sure that we're always cognizant of the sort of impact that we can have as a teacher. But at the same time, if everybody in this room were to tell me now, or everyone watching this, were to tell me, no, this is weird and it could only possibly ever apply to an art teacher, then that in another sense would be, you know, validating for me, because it would justify this sense of marginality, you know, which is, to be honest with you, a bit of a pain in the bum. Because, you know, I've always just I want to feel like part of this school and every school, and I want to feel part of education, and I want to engage with the big conversations. But, you know, if they just don't apply to me because what I do is different, then, you know, so be it. But I'd just like to find out. I don't know what I'm saying here. Let's just move on. Here's an example of a lesson where I personally try to walk the line between these two things. Um, it's a mark making lesson. It's very tight, structured, and compartmentalized. There's a focus on technique, of course, as I've said. We're covering the basics here. This is a year 7 lesson. There is an element of competition there, which kind of like some people think of as being quite a traditional device in teaching. And we use lots of whole group feedback, which again is kind of something that this school has really championed, um, and is kind of, to me, like tied up with its knowledge rich emphasis. On the other hand, it's a very independent lesson where students obviously are working on their own work and trying to make that work their own. It's lively, at times, within reason, and dynamic. Like there's lots of change in pace. There will be moments that are silent. There will be moments where you know I'm questioning and asking for students to submit their ideas. But yeah, it's such a great one. Lesson. I love this lesson. Honestly, it's full of praise from me, like really genuine praise, because I love this lesson so much for moments of genuine invention and innovation. And this lesson really does give rise to those moments. And often it will come from unexpected individuals, people that, might not consider themselves to be experienced drawers or anything like that, or might find that they're not top of the class in maths or English, but in this lesson, they come out on top. Or I single them out for praise because I think what they've done is really interesting, and that just warms my heart, makes it all worthwhile. And of course, there's lots of bespoke advice, lots of one-on-one. So it's not just me addressing the group as if they were a unit. I go in there and I speak to individuals. And again, I think that's for some people, that's quite a progressive sort of way of approaching things. But yeah, either way, this lesson is a scheme highlight for me. It's something we refer back to constantly, and it is an example of a lesson that blends direct instruction with independent sort of work, and it does it well, and I'm really proud of it, to be honest with you. Um, Here's an idea of how you might apply these hands-off moments to your own subject. You might apply this idea to your own subjects. Now, I coined this term "hands-off moment." I'm sure other people have used something similar or different, but really, I was observing a PGCE student of ours. Her name was Jamie. Really enjoyed working with her, and I noticed that she was working really hard throughout every single lesson, from beginning to end. She was always talking to someone, helping someone, sorting something out. And I wanted her to try just stepping back for 5-10 minutes, observing the group. Letting them get on with it, basically, because I said, listen, it will help them compete with each other a little bit, take ownership of what they're doing. It will stop them from constantly asking you for help just by default, just whenever they come up against a slight issue. To stop that, they need to get used to solving their own problems every now and then. It's just obviously sustained practice, working for 5-10 minutes without any help. You just have to get on with it. And it gives them, of course, an opportunity to apply not only what's been talked about in that lesson, but all of the lessons leading up to it. For you, I said to Jamie, for you, it will give you a moment to look at the whole room, to look at who's behaving themselves, who isn't, who's engaging, who isn't, and to reflect on what's worked well and what hasn't. So you might be teaching the same lesson again later in the day, and you need to think about how you might do it differently, or you might just have had a conversation with someone that it might not have gone the way you expected it to, and you might want to think about that. You do have to preserve your energy, because in art, we work hard. We're always on our feet, we're always moving around the room, and we've always got a lot of plates spinning. And you have to prepare maybe for what's next. I'm reminded of a great piece of CPD by another subject teacher who's a fantastic teacher, and he showed us his method of getting a lesson packed up and finished in under 2 minutes. It involved having all the students hand their exercise books at the end of the row, and then the students at the back of the room coming forward to the front, collecting the exercise books. And he was like, and that's it, that's how you end a lesson. And obviously, to me, that was a bit funny, because in my lesson we have to hand out you know, rollers, scissors, glue sticks. I have to put ink out on the tables, masking tape. Then we have to put all the wet work on the drying rack. The sketchbooks have to come in, but then a piece of paper that I need to. It's really complicated. And at the end of the lesson, I've got sort of 52 dirty hands, 26 dirty rollers, or like paintbrushes or whatever. A lot to deal with, and it's not as easy as that. It never is. So you need to be able to have 10 seconds to yourself in order to think about that. And you could even send an email or like catch up. I'm always getting told off by Miss Courtney for not sending someone to reception, even though she's emailed. So it's good to do that, I think. So that's all I've got to say today. I just wanted to end on a bit of a positive, because I don't want you guys to think that I'm nibbling at the hand that feeds here. I am really, really grateful and proud to work in this school. It's a great school, full of really intelligent people. And every time I go to a training session, for me, the pleasure is hearing, like, I'm reminded of going to hear the head of maths speak um, last year, I think. And then straight after him, I went to see deputy head of sixth form speaking, and their views couldn't have been more different. But I left both sessions absolutely buzzing, reflecting, thinking about you know what I thought, and I'm just really glad that both those people were offered the opportunity to speak, and that they kind of are part of this community, and I hope that I am. Um, Here's a quote from Claire, a recent article she wrote for the TS about teacher training. And, she was a voice of reason. She said, dogma stifles debate and prevents us from learning from each other. I couldn't agree more with that. And I was really glad to read it. Thank you so much for listening to me today. And if you have any feedback or questions or points that you'd like to make, I would love to hear from you. So that's all from me. Let me just stop sharing uh, and lean back and say goodbye. Thank you so much, and farewell.